What's up, guys? It's your Jimbo here, and we have a video coming out off the press about the ban and restricted announcement from Wizards of the Coast for Standard. This is a ban announcement that we knew was coming, and for most part knew what it was going to include, though there is a surprise on there that we will cover that I think many people didn't know was going to be banned, in this announcement anyway. For the most part, I'll start off by saying I agree with the ban announcement here. I think that the cards that they chosen are perfectly fine. I don't think anybody is going to be unhappy about the ban announcement here, and I think a lot of people are going to be relieved initially. I'm not sure they're going to be so happy about what they're walking into in terms of the next meta, and we'll discuss that also. But I think that overall this is going to be a healthy improvement for the standard format. Do remember, guys, if you do play on Magic the Gathering Arena, you do get your wild cards back if you craft these cards or have these cards crafted. So do make sure you're going to be taking advantage of that. These cards still can be used in other formats if you have them crafted. Let's talk about the cards that were crafted. First off, we'll start by reading the ban announcement itself. We have that here. So this is from the Magic website, and I will post a link in the description down below. So it says that in Standard, we have Fable of the Mirror Breaker / Reflection of Kiki-Jiki is banned. Now, everybody knows this is one of the biggest value add cards in Standard at the moment. It's 3 mana, only has 1 colored mana source that you need, 1 red, and can be put into any deck that has red mana. So this means easy for 3, 4, 5 color decks to play, and the value that you get from this card is infinite. The only way that you are getting out even with your opponent if they cast this is if you counter it on the spot. Otherwise, they're going to get incremental value over you any other way you decide to deal with this. So when they cast the enchantment, right, they get their 2/2 token. When that token swings, they get a artifact that gives them mana. Then turn 2, they get to filter through 2 cards if they want to from their hand. It means they get to draw 2 new cards, and then they also get the Kiki-Jiki token if it makes it to turn 3. So if you don't deal with this immediately as it's on the stack, at the very best for you, they're either going to be left with the token when you deal with the enchantment, or they're going to be still have the enchantment gaining value while you deal with the token creature. And the longer it sits on the board, the more value they get and the bigger disadvantage you're being put at. So while this card is not insanely overpowered, it's got 3 good powers on it, right? It does 3 things very well. It's not something extremely overpowered, if you think of, more recent bans like Oko, for example. That's a card that was just way overtuned, and just no matter what, it was going to be breaking the meta. This is a card that has nothing extremely overpowered on it, but has 3 huge value adds that happen over the course of 3 turns, and it's kind of hard to deal with. The other one that is very clear that was going to be banned was going to be Reckoner Bankbuster. Reckoner Bankbuster, first off, is a colorless artifact. This means that literally any deck can play it. It's very easy to turn it into a creature. Almost any deck can do that, to swing with a 4/4, and has the added value of being able to draw you 3 cards and create you 1 token. This is just a shoe-in to literally every single deck that can spend 2 mana to draw cards, which is going to be every deck. There's no reason any deck would not want to have this in it, unless there's some anti-artifact synergy going on. But this is just an auto-include for everything, and it kind of functions on the same level as Fable. The one difference being is if it is turn 2, turn 3, or your opponent is mana starved. If they do play the Bankbuster, you can get rid of it before they get any value out of it. But as soon as they can have 2 free mana to tap it and draw a card, at the very best, you're just breaking even. And then at the worst, you're losing value every turn after that. So I don't particularly think it's, again, just like Fable, I don't think it's an extremely overpowered card. I don't particularly agree that it's a ban-worthy card. But it definitely does stand out in the meta, and I think a lot of people are going to be happy to see it go. The one that really caught, I think, a lot of people by surprise, myself included, is Invoke Despair. And this is a unique card that had come out where it gives black a way to deal with enchantments. And the downside of the card, right, the drawback of the card is supposed to be that it costs a very aggressive mana cost, right? You need 4 black mana to cast it, 1 colorless. That intent of that is to be that it can't be included in very many decks. But as we know through Magic through history, mana cost is never going to prevent people from playing good cards in their deck. They will find a way. You know, if you build it, they will come. That's just kind of the way it is. So regardless of the 4 black mana that this card requires to cast, it still made it into 2 and 3 colored decks, and it's just a really, really, really strong card. It can gain you 3 cards. It can deal 6 damage to your opponent. It can make them sacrifice 3 permanents if they mess up, maybe even more. The value add that you get from this card is huge. Now, I will say, this might be a hot take here coming off the press. I don't think that this is a good ban. I think that this may strengthen decks that did play this card. So the mana cost itself was very prohibitive, right? So by removing this prohibitive mana cost card from their deck, you're opening up options for them to play other cards and change around their mana base and be more aggressive in other ways that they couldn't be because of the aggressive mana cost of Invoke Despair. So this kind of gives things like, Rakdos midrange and Grixis midrange, or you might even see like Sultai or Grixis Control pop up if the midrange decks kind of start falling out of favor. And they're going to be able to take advantage of the easier mana base that they're going to have now, because they don't have to worry about casting Invoke Despair on turn 5, turn 6. The only time I really felt like Invoke Despair was like an insanely powerful card was when it was being, either your opponent gets really lucky or you get really lucky and you draw them back to back to back. Then it's kind of backbreaking. Or if you have Chandra out and you're getting to clone it or copy it and cast it twice in the same turn, obviously that's very backbreaking too. But overall, I think people will be happy to see it go. Now, Sheolred is a card that did not make the list for being banned, and I think a lot of people are going to have question marks about that. Sheolred gets seen in a lot of decks. It only has 2 black mana sources. You're still going to see it in every deck that is running black no matter what. Does die to a Go for the Throat and plenty of other removal cards, so I think that it's pretty easy to deal with itself. But I think a lot of people are going to be unhappy that they don't see it on this list. So let's read their philosophy update here. Just give us a little bit of insight into what they were thinking about the bans and how they came to the decision to do this. So it says the ban and restricted philosophy update with changes to standard. Recently, we released an article talking about tabletop standard and our renewed focus to improve it at every level. Today represents our second step towards delivering on that goal. And if you guys haven't read this article yet, I will also link this one in the description. When talking to players about bans and standard, most of the community feedback we've received, whether coming from players competing at the top tables of the Pro Tour or those enjoying a more relaxed Wednesday night standard at their local game store, has focused on how disruptive our current banning cadence can be. Bans are a pain point for standard engagement. And just to touch on that, it may not hurt us in Arena when things get banned because we do get our wild cards back. You do have to remember that in paper Magic and other forms of Magic, when the cards get banned, you're just at a loss. That's it. And there's no way, the only way you're going to get the value back out of the banned cards is if somebody doesn't know that they've been banned yet, and you kind of scum them into trading or buying those cards at full price, knowing darn well they won't be able to use them here in the near future. They are too unpredictable, too inconsistent, and hurts players' ability to have confidence in building and playing their decks. Moving forward, we are going to change the cadence with which we manage our formats, particularly Standard. Our goal is to make most of our format changes once a year for greater consistency. This announcement will happen annually before Fall Preview begins. We will not only include Standard, but also Modern, Pioneer, Legacy, and Vintage. Broadly, our goal of Standard remaining a fun and healthy play environment hasn't changed. However, we will be placing more scrutiny on cards and play patterns that have been in play longer to ensure Standard is fresh, engaging, or continually exciting format. Now, what they mean by this is possibly banning cards not because they're way overpowered, but because they see a lot of play and have been in Standard for a long time, and they want to forcefully change the, let's call it forceful rotation. They want to forcefully rotate the Standard environment into new decks. In addition to the yearly announcement, we will also have a banned and restricted update on the third Monday after every set release, specifically dedicated to addressing large environmental imbalances. These will, by and large, happen after the Pro Tour. There we go. So at least we have a very specific day as to when these will be, so we can figure out when the sets are going to be released. We go to the third Monday after that. When we're going to be looking at a BNR announcement. Our intention is that it should be very rare for us to use this 3-week window to make Standard changes. If a new card immediately and dramatically has a negative impact on the format, we believe it's important that our players don't feel stuck with a bad format for upwards of a year. We will reserve this window for cards on the level of Felidar Guardian as a tool we hope to never use. Ideally, most Standard updates, also something like Oko, most Standard updates should take place only once a year to renew players' confidence in their deck selection and construction. That said, we are banning 3 cards in Standard today to help make this transition. We felt it was important to begin this new era of Standard with a clean slate, so to speak, without a specter of recent ban talk hanging in the format. To do so, we decided to make the following changes. Those are the 3 cards that we've talked about being banned. We've been watching the rise and dominance of the core 3-color shell base in black-red. That's also, they're including Grixis in there, over the past several set releases and premier level tournaments. We believe that these changes will help reduce the win rate of the dominant strategy in the format and create an exciting shakeup and entry point to the format preceding the summer release of Wilds of Eldraine. And I think it will do that. I think that even with these bans, I feel like you're still going to can see a very strong Rakdos midrange. I think you're also going to see the Jeskai midrange deck still performing well, known as Jeskai Dragons, as we've seen in the most recent event. I think that the enchantment deck is still going to be very strong. Mono red is going to take advantage of the shakeup by squeezing out easy wins, so be on the lookout for that. And I think we might even see maybe a little bit of a control deck coming in to take advantage of the mid-range decks kind of faltering here. Fable the Mirror Breaker, a reflection of Kiki-Jiki, has been the backbone of strategies based in red-black and one of the strongest cards in the format for the entirety of its tenure in Standard. Its ability to generate resources, card flow, and be a must-kill threat is unmatched in its level of efficiency. Counterplay available to it is low and frequently cost much more than 3 mana, and especially difficult to beat on the draw. By removing Fable, we hope to reduce the power of black-red decks, but also making deck-building choices for these strategies more meaningful as to whether they want a threat, card selection, or the ability to enable reanimation. For these reasons, as well as the high play rate of the card across many decks, Fable is banned. Reckoning Backbuster has been the go-to card advantage engine for many decks and Standards since its release. It's a colorless card, has been effortless. It has been effortless to slot into a wide variety of colors and strategies. Its general ubiquity and strength have pushed out other card advantage options too much as a colorless card, right? Because there's no downside to including it into your deck. It has also put stress on creature sizing, as creatures that can crew Reckoner Bankbuster have been more favored than others to promote more diversity and give back power to other types of cards in different colors. Reckoner Bankbuster has been banned. So what they're thinking is that you might not prioritize playing creatures that have 3 power as much so that you could crew the Bankbuster. Now you'll look at other cards with 1 and 2 power to potentially change up the card selection in the decks. I don't really think so. I think just the creatures being played that have 3 power, they're already good creatures, and that's just a byproduct of cards just being good. Like, you're not going to not play you're not going to play Tithe because you don't have Bankbuster anymore, right? He's just a good card by himself. Invoke Despair has been the premier curve topper in most red-black decks and black-based strategies for most of its lifetime. Not only is it powerful for managing the battlefield and generating card advantage, but has also been excellent for shoring up some of black's weaknesses. Traditionally, playing a wide variety of permanent types is strong against decks with lots of 1-for-1 removal. Invoke Despair makes it especially difficult to find ample counterplay to black strategies, as it is an effective card to cast on an empty board, preys upon the enchantments and planeswalkers that have historically effective against these types of heavy removal strategies. Due to its power level and negative impact on card diversity, it has been banned. We will have our first yearly banned and restricted announcement on August the 7th, 2013, ahead of Wilds of Eldraine preview. Okay. So they're going to start their first announcement on August the 7th, and then when Wilds come out, 3 Mondays after that, they'll have another potential announcement that they hope will not have to ban anything, but have it there just in case. Very interesting there. So what does this mean for Standard? So if we have Fable of the Mirror Breaker, we have Invoke Despair, and Reckoner Bankbuster banned, I think for the Rakdos mid-range decks, I think that it's very possible that these cards could just be replaced with other cards, and I think they would still be very playable. I don't think it completely destroys the deck. I think that they'll be able to find a decent replacement. Obviously, you're not going to replace it with anything that gives you as much value as Invoke Despair. You're not going to replace it with anything that gives you as much value as Fable or Reckoner. But I do believe that you could find cards that would be able to leave the deck playable in a fairly competitive state. Because the thing to remember is that every single deck that plays red, right? Doesn't matter what it is. Maybe mono red is the exception. But I have even seen it in mono red prowess decks. Every deck that can play a red source does play Fable the Mirror Breaker. So what that means is that every other deck is also going to be weakened by that amount, right? Blue-white soldiers does not get affected by this, so they're in the clear. The enchantment decks do not get affected by this, so they are in the clear. You want to be on the lookout for those guys. Reckoner Bankbuster, again, almost every deck is going to be playing Bankbusters, so it's not specifically Rakdos that's being affected by this ban. Everything is being affected by this ban equally. Now, the one place where Rakdos does specifically get hit, where a lot of these other decks don't, is going to be Invoke Despair, right? Jeskai Dragons does not get affected by it. Blue-white doesn't get affected by it. Enchantments doesn't get affected by it. Mono red doesn't get affected by it. So that's going to be the one really big one there that lowers the power level of this deck specifically, where the other decks don't have to worry about that. But I do think that we could still see a shell. I imagine that we probably go full into Grixis now, right? Grixis mid-range with Corpse Appraiser. We had already seen that deck being pretty popular coming up. We don't have to worry about the mana base in Grixis now with having the 4 black mana. So we can focus on playing other cards at a greater value, especially like Gix and stuff like that. So I think that this deck is going to be just fine. Very possible that it just completely flips over into the Grixis mid-range deck. Azorius Soldiers is what we were just talking about. Azorius Soldiers has no downside here. They're not losing anything. This deck is going to be very popular. If you're looking at decks what decks you're going to need to beat here going forward, you want to take a big look at this deck right here, and you're going to want to come up with ways to deal with what they're doing. This deck is going to be huge. It was already a very good deck. It was already well placed in the standard, and it's only getting catapulted up with these bans, especially with Wandering Emperor not being banned. That card is going to be probably one of the most played cards in standard right now, or I should say after the ban. 4-color Ramp is another one that doesn't see really any downside here. You can see in the normal deck list here, they only played 2 Reckoner Bankbusters anyway, so not a huge loss there. They're just going to stay a good deck like they were. They will just keep dominating the way they are. You're going to have to find ways to deal with Atraxa, Atali, Invasion of Zendikar, just like we've been doing before. That's not going to change. It's going to be a very popular deck that you're going to see all over the metagame. Jeskai Midrange, this is a new deck also called Jeskai Dragons, even though it only has one dragon in the deck. It's an orc dragon. Could also be called Jeskai Orcs, because there's the same amount of orcs as there are dragons in the deck. Thank you, Twitter, for that one. Plays 4 Wandering Emperors, who I think is one of the strongest cards in Standard right now after the bans. We also have the Invasions, which I think are super strong. I think the Invasion of New Phyrexia is a lot stronger than people are giving it credit for. I would like to see New Phyrexia Invasion going up to 2 or even 3 in the deck. The mana cost is, I know, a part of the problem there. Abrades will definitely be coming out of the deck now. I don't think there's any other must-kill enchantments in Standard. We'd have to just see what kind of happens there. At the very least, it just becomes a sideboard card, I would bet. Everything else stays the same. They get rid of their Bank Buster. They get rid of their Fable. And it's going to be an extremely strong deck going forward. Celestia Enchantments, we've seen a Seth Manfield playing in the event, along with somebody else is playing it too, maybe even 2 other people. This deck was really strong. The one thing to remember about this deck is, I don't want to say it's not new player friendly, but I want to say that you have to have some time in with the deck to really understand the inner workings of how it works. This deck is not friendly to mulligans. You want a very specific start. You can't have your turn 1, 2, 3 being whiffs, not doing anything. Very often you keep 1 land hands, so it's important to know what you need, what else you need to have in hand with your 1 land hand. It's a very important deck that requires a lot of knowledge of your outs, I would say, going forward with this deck. But it is very strong. A lot of them are not, or Seth in particular is not playing Calyx. There's multiple versions of this deck. I do like the Calyx version, but I don't know if I wouldn't really be comfortable saying whether it's better or worse without it. Now, Esper Legends or Esper Midrange was already a very, very strong deck. The only problem is it was kind of cut down by the Rakdos deck. With Rakdos not being the premier leader of the meta anymore, there's a very good chance that we are going to see Esper Legends making a comeback. So this is a card that we're going to want to, this is a deck that we're going to want to have our eyes on. Thalia is going to be very, very strong in this meta. You're going to have a lot of Thalias around, so be on the lookout for that. And if I had to pick my next deck, what I think is going to be the head of the meta, I personally think it's going to be this Esper Legends deck. I would say if you're looking to decide what you want to spend your wild cards on, I'd put my money here. This is in particular what I would go with. Now, if we're looking at the percentages here, I think that this 22% is going to just migrate into this Grixis Midrange here. I think that Grixis Midrange is still going to be perfectly fine, and they're going to be able to play a lot of really good cards here, taking out the 3 Abrades, taking out the 4 Invokes, the 4 Mirror Breakers, 2 Bank Busters. That leaves them with a ton of options to refill in these positions to deal with the other future cards in the meta. Black, red, and blue together. Those 3 colors, you can really answer anything else that's happening. It's just a matter of seeing where the rest of the meta goes, and then the Grixis Midrange deck will adapt. So you may see the Grixis Midrange kind of fall out of favor for a little bit while the rest of the meta kind of settles. And then once the meta has settled, you'll see Grixis Midrange come back with answers to these other problems and ways to deal with them, and then it'll be a strong contender. If you want to be kind of trying to be ahead of the meta, you could be the one piloting Grixis Midrange, coming up with the ideas on how to beat these other decks with Grixis Midrange, what answers to include, and how to get out ahead of everybody else. I think that would be a pretty good way to go about it. One thing I wanted to point out about the ban list is a tweet that Frank had put out a bit earlier before the ban list had come out. And I think it's very important to look at this in addition to the ban list and see, maybe this is just because I've been playing Magic for a very long time, back before cards really were ever banned, right? Up until like the Jace the Mind Sculptor era, when we really did need some standard bans. And then from there going forward, they become more and more common. And nowadays, as we can see with this ban here, banning cards that are not just insanely overpowered, but just banning cards because they're very, very popular in the meta. So as we've seen here with the Arena Championship 3 that just happened, you've seen Frank post this tweet where he points out that the meta has evolved around the good cards, which is the Rakdos base deck, and because of that, all the other competitors in the field, which were like Azorius Soldiers, Jeskai Midrange, enchantments, and the other little mini decks that we've seen going through there. I think there was an Orzhov mid-range deck and some others. The Rakdos deck has only had a 47.7% of their matches won against the rest of the field, which means that the meta is not unhealthy. It means that the Rakdos-based decks are not unbeatable. It means that we didn't exactly need a ban if you put the standard metagame in a vacuum and keep out the opinions of the people playing the game and just look at it statistically. Now, are bans better if you do them based on the popular vote of the community? Maybe. I'm not the one to say whether that's the way to go ahead and do it or not do it. I'm always up for a mini standard rotation like this. I'm fine with changing my deck and playing something different. I get my wild cards back, and it's perfectly fine. It doesn't matter to me either way. But I did just want to point out how the deck didn't even have a 50% win percent against the rest of the field, and still had 3 cards specifically from that deck get banned out of it. Granted, those bans do hit other decks. So it'll be interesting to see where the other decks come from. I think it's important to point out that it is an echo chamber. Like I said, if you're terminally online, an avid Reddit user or doom scroller on Twitter, it's important to see that statistically the deck was okay. Whether you're talking about the win percentage of this deck or something that you would see Saffron talk about a lot is the percentage that the cards get played in other decks. So when 70% of all decks in standard are playing Bankbuster, does it need to be banned, right? So again, you're not banning it because it's at a insanely high power level, but an insanely high amount of usage in that scenario. Because it's so convenient and easy to put in every deck. It's colorless. It gives you card advantage. It is a creature. So banning for different reasons here. It'll be interesting to see how the meta shapes up. What are you guys planning on playing? Let me know down in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. We've been playing Magic for a very long time. Recently got the itch to come back and do it, so here we are. I was playing Rakdos mid-range. Once we get our wild cards back, I'll be looking at what I think the next best deck to play is, which I think we're probably going to hint. We're either going to go into the Jeskai deck or the Esper mid-range deck, I think, though who knows. We'll have to see what the wild cards can tell us going into the future. I appreciate everybody for hanging out. If there's anything you want me to cover, any ideas that for videos that you want to see, any niche missing in this market, anything that I missed in this video, let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you guys later. Adios.